All right, in this episode of the Church Photographers Podcast, we walk through the ultimate weekend service shot list covering 43 shots that you need to capture during your weekend services. And we'll show you where to get this guide plus an entire bank of example images. But before we get there, I'm Rob Lauder.
And I'm Connor Strickland.
And this is the Church Photographers Podcast. All right, man. So it's a big day here in Church Photographer Studios for a number of reasons. Number one, we are now taking our first foray into the magical world of video. Welcome. Listeners and now viewers.
Yep.
This content will be posted to our YouTube channel, so go check it out. Link will be in the podcast if you're listening.
Yep.
But man, we need some. We've
had some experience doing this,
public
right?
shaming here. Tell the people why we need public shaming.
So this is our second time recording this podcast episode because the first
no, this is our first time recording this podcast episode on video. Anyway,
on video, exactly. We have the audio from a prior one. However, Rob forgot to hit the record button on the video.
All right, and we reference video so many times because it's such a big deal, and we're so excited to bring you video. Public shaming.
But here we go, our first official video podcast.
Yep, and who hasn't done that, right? Let he who has never forgotten to hit the record button cast the first. All right, let's tell the people what they're getting, and then we'll dive into content. So if you are watching on video on our YouTube channel, I'm making sure we're recording, you will see this beautiful content presented for you. If you are not listening to this content or watching this content on YouTube, if you're just following along via our podcast, we love you too. And so we've made it available as a PDF, 100% free in the freebie vault at churchphotographers.com/freebies. Go there, get this content. This is the ultimate weekend service shot list.
Yep.
We're going to walk through 9 specific areas where you can capture photos on the weekend and stop leaving it to chance. Stop being like me when I first started, showing up with a camera and being like, what am I going to shoot today?
Yep.
Have a checklist, have a system, have a process. But first, we've got a message from some friends of ours. All right, man, let's dive into the first of these 9 areas for our ultimate weekend service shot list.
Yep.
The very first area that you can capture is in the parking lot. And this is where we're going to show guests what to expect when they arrive. We're going to put service on display, and we're going to show people what it's like to pull into our church property. And so we're going to start with our photos in the parking lot. A few essential shots in this area. Capture your volunteers setting up because they're going to get there early. They're going to get there right at the crack of dawn. They're going to be setting out cones. They're going to be setting up flags. They're going to be wearing their cool vests in the parking lot and have their little lightsabers. Capture the photos of volunteers setting up to honor them and to show your congregation what goes on before they even arrive. Number 2, volunteers parking cars. We have a little phrase at our church, the sermon starts in the parking lot. And this is an opportunity for our congregation to help first-time guests or to help regular attendees get situated, find a spot in our busy and crowded parking lot so that they can get to church without running somebody over or getting their car towed. It's a valuable ministry opportunity. We want to put that on display. Next, capture guests walking into your church. This is just an opportunity to show, hey, people go here. People are just like you and me. They're walking up. They're seeing what's going on. And they're coming here often for the first time, too. So you can see what it's like. If you are a guest and you're considering coming to our church, what it's like to walk up. As well, make sure that you're capturing signage in shots when you can, because you're going to want to use these images on your website. You're going to want to use these images on social media, and you want people to know that this is actually your building and not just a random building. So if you can include those feather flags, if you can include building signage, if you can include the A-frames that you've got going up and down your parking lot, capture those as well so people can kind of get an idea of what it's like to come up. And also your communications team can use those to communicate different things on your website, via social, etc. Some pro tips on capturing images in the parking lot. Remember that phrase, the sermon starts in the parking lot. It's not just a bunch of people parking cars. It's a bunch of people preaching the gospel and showing what it's like to serve in a humble way to help folks get to church on time and find where they're going. And then also look for ways to capture stories of God's people serving their community in humble ways. And that's the parking lot. So Connor, where are we going next?
Next, we go on to the sidewalk. Once again, put hospitality on display. Some essential shots here for the sidewalk shots. Greeters and welcome team. Great way to show a first impression of your church. Show people with smiles, holding signs, welcoming people, showing them how they can get involved, and just welcoming them into that community. Next is a wide shot of the church building, like you had just mentioned. This is a great place to get that shot of the church. You mentioned that almost all your photographers, you ask them to get a wide shot or at least a couple wide shots of your church each Sunday.
Yep, every single time. I'm going to remind them that, hey, just capture a quick wide shot of the church. That way we know that we have them in the library. As seasons change, as things change around the church, that will keep them fresh and up to date. And those go on our website. Those go on our social media pages and stuff like that.
Definitely. Next, guests entering church. Show people actually walking into your church. It's pretty straightforward on that one. And then same people leaving the church. Hopefully they're walking out of the church with smiles on their faces, with their kids, with their families. They're hugging someone goodbye, seeing them that week in small group, or inviting someone to come back next week. They're interacting with some of your volunteers. Great place to show off the culture and the fellowship going on at your church.
Hopefully they're smiling on the way out of the sermon. If not, either your pastor's preaching on Lamentations, or you need to show those images to your pastor and say, hey, we got something to address here.
Yep, absolutely. A big thing to capture on the sidewalk is the first-time guest area. This is a great place for visitors who are going to be coming to your church. They can see this on the website, on social media, or somewhere else, and say, okay, I know that there is a place designated for me. They can see that tent. It's recognizable when they show up on the sidewalk, and they can say, okay, this is my first time. I can walk up there. I can get questions answered. I can get involved, etc. And then capture as much interaction as possible. You don't want people just to be standing there super stiff, walking by without getting a hello or a hug or a handshake or something. This is a great place to show the fellowship and then once again, the hospitality that is going on at the church. Some pro tips for shooting on the sidewalk. Be sure to get people in the frame. Pictures of just buildings aren't interesting. You tell the photographers all the time to get photos of what? People, and people. Exactly. So make sure you get people in these photos. Next, watch your exposure and your white balance when you're transitioning from indoor to outdoor. This is hard.
Yeah. So one of the big challenges of being a church photographer or an event photographer in general, particularly if you're not comfortable with your gear and if you don't know how your exposure settings work, is going from indoors to outdoors and all the different environments you have to shoot in. And so we're actually going to be producing some courses on how to manage all that. But then, we can't just leave it to auto mode on our camera to know that, hey, we're outside on a cloudy day and now we're coming inside to incandescent light and it's darker. You really got to be on your toes in that regard. So learn how to use your camera, learn how to use it in manual mode, and learn how all the settings work together on your camera.
Yep, and then going off of the settings, once again, raise your f-stop when you're shooting your building shots to make sure that as much of that image is in focus as possible. Yep. All right, Rob, what's next?
Cool. So now we're going to move into the church. We're going to go into the lobby. And this is an opportunity with these shots to help our guests feel welcome before they even arrive. Yep. So they're going to know what to expect when they walk in. They're going to know where different things are. And, just like the first-time guest tent, they're going to know that there's spaces available for them to feel comfortable when they walk into your church. And so here's some essential shots in the church lobby. Number one, greeters holding doors. This is kind of it seems like why do we want to get a photo of somebody holding doors? Does two things. Number one, it kind of communicates to the first-time guest what it's going to feel like literally as they're walking in the door. I think those shots are particularly powerful on social or on your website. But then two, that first impressions volunteer is often like, for me, when I served in that role, was like almost like a soul-crushing role because day in and day out, I would smile, I'd say hello, and people are just trying to
walk right by. Like, yep. I'm late. I've got to get the kids, get everything.
And if you're watching on video, I just went, but if you're listening, that was my hand going past the mic like somebody was walking past me.
Which you can see now because we're recording.
Check out our YouTube channel. So greeters holding doors. Number two, people smiling and talking. Again, capture as much interaction as possible. The point here isn't to show off your building. The point here is to show off your congregation and to help somebody feel like they're part of your community. And so people smiling, people talking. That lobby area is the place where people congregate. And that's where they hang out, and that's where they spend time. They don't do that in the rows in your church. They don't do that like in the parking lot out by their cars. Maybe they do a little bit. But the lobby is often the place where people congregate, capture those interactions that happen in just the few minutes before and after service.
Yep.
Also, if you have a welcome or a next steps area in your lobby, capture photos of that. Again, not just the space, people being served at that area. So people, like we have iPad kiosks at our next steps area, people interacting with that and finding a small group or whatever needs they're looking to have filled there. And then keep an eye out for those moments of connection between volunteers and guests, between guests themselves, between the volunteers. Look for interactions between people, because those tell stories more than just like the dude walking across your church lobby. Some pro tips here. Use a long lens to shoot from a distance to capture those candid shots. If you're using a short lens and you're like right up in somebody's face, they're going to see you there. It's no longer a candid shot. They know that there's a photographer watching them and they're on guard. By the same token, help people feel comfortable when you do get those close shots by smiling, by saying hello, introduce yourself. There's virtue in people looking at the camera. And if you see the example image that we use on this page, we've got a photo of this little kid looking at the camera. And when I look at the camera and when I talk to you, or when I look at the camera and you see a picture of a photo of somebody looking right at you, you connect with it in a different way. And so for this photo, I actually asked the mom who was involved. It's like, hey, like, your kid looks super cute. He's got this cool balloon that has "You Are Sent" on it, which is our tagline. Can I get a quick photo of him? We asked for consent, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. She said yes, and by posing that child, I was able to get a much more intimate and much more engaging photograph than if it were complete candid and he was just kind of like running around the church lobby. Brings us to point number 3 in the pro tip section here. Don't be afraid to pose people. If you are like me when I started photographing and I was most comfortable hiding behind my camera and not engaging with the people I was photographing, go back and listen to a couple episodes back when we interviewed Jeremy Poland, because he has some great tips on how to make people feel special and comfortable while you are photographing them, and how to feel comfortable yourself. All right, Connor, take us into the kids area.
Yeah, so briefly just mentioned talking about kids and getting consent. We're going to dive all into that right here. One of the big reasons you're trying to get photos of the kids area is to showcase the next generation for Christ. Some essential shots when taking the kids area. Kids volunteers. Showcase the people that are actually going to be involved working with the kids, teaching the kids, discipling the kids, so that the parents, other people, when they see it online, they can see, okay, these are the people that are going to be taking care of my kid during the service. Kids and leaders playing games. Once again, this is a great way to show them actually engaging with each other. Once again, we're going for engaging shots. We don't want just a kid sitting in the middle of a room by himself. That is not the message you're trying to get across. So leaders, kids interacting, playing together, fun. They can show the kids, oh, this is where you're about to go. You're going to have fun. There's kids laughing. Great way to really show that off. Kids worship time. This is also a great way to showcase that not only are your kids just going to be here, it's not just daycare. However, they're going to be discipled. They're going to be learning about Jesus, and they are ultimately raising the next generation for Christ. Another one is kids learning and interacting with leaders. This all goes into that same premise of kids, leaders interacting together. They're not just sitting in a line or in a room or off doing their own thing. They're being intentionally invested in by the leaders and volunteers. And then kids with their parents. Great way to show the culture of the church, to show families together, to show really, okay, this is a community and this is what you're ultimately inviting people into when you're using these photos.
Yeah, so let me take the pro tips on this one for 2 reasons. Number 1, I've got kids. And number 2, there are some sensitive policies we need to deal with when we're photographing kids.
Definitely.
So number 1 is policy. Make sure that you have policies set for who can shoot within your kids area and when and where they can shoot within your kids area. It's important to have consent when you're talking about kids, because there are foster kids who are in your congregation who can't be photographed and they can't have those images published anywhere. So get consent before photographing your children. 2 ways to do that. 1, if you have event registrations for something like VBS or Kids Week or something like that, you can ask on the event registration, do we have consent to photograph your child? If they don't, kids in our congregation get a sticker. Our photographers know they are no photo, so don't take photos of them. And if a photo does slip through, our communications team knows that those kids were not supposed to be photographed. We can get rid of those images. And then the second way is we'll put signs up with a similar system. If we're just capturing a weekend service where there is no registration, have a sign saying, very prominently placed at the entrance to your kids area, we are going to be photographing today. If you don't want your kid photographed, let one of our staff members know, and they will take care of that. Same process. They get a sticker. Yep. We know, no photo. So what happens if you just you don't have the time to get consent? You need models in a pinch. If you got your own kids, put them to work. My kids have probably been photographed more than anybody else in our church, just because it's like, oh, hey, cute moment. Hey, kids, get over here. Like if you see in our example for this area in our document, we got a photo of this cute little girl pointing up at one of the posters. I'm biased because she's my cute little girl. I noticed just out of the corner of my eye, she was like looking at the poster. I'm like, hey, Emma, go point at that. And then she did. Also, you can always use a photo of a kid from behind if they're not identifiable. So keep that in mind. That you just make sure that you're not doing anything that's creepy or that's going to upset a parent when you do that. Speaking of creepy, one little pet peeve of mine is when we're photographing in the kids area, and almost every church, those kids have stickers with their names on them, first and last names, and those stickers are visible in photos. Protect your kids. It takes 2 seconds using Lightroom's heal tool to zoom in real close, heal out that name on the sticker, and you capture some of the white from around the name, put it over the name, and you're protecting your kids.
Yep.
So take those extra 2 seconds, make sure that your kids' names aren't getting leaked to the public. All right, so we're going to take a quick break, and then we've got 5 more areas to dive into. We'll be right back after we hear from some friends of ours. All right, welcome back. We are going to continue on with our ultimate weekend service shot list with 5 more areas within your church that you can take photos every single weekend. The next one is on stage. We're going to capture what's going on up in front of our congregation as our worship leaders are leading our congregation in worship. Some essential shots here. Make sure that you're capturing wide angles, medium angles, and wide shots, medium shots, and tight shots. Same thing with every area that you're going to capture. Those wide shots really help establish the viewer in the space. Those medium shots get a little bit more detail, but then those tight shots help a viewer to really see what's going on in a specific area, and you're kind of framing their attention. Be sure to do that during the worship set. So if you look at some of our example images in this area, we've got wide shots from the back of the house that really help a first-time guest feel what it's like to be in the space. They can kind of get a feel for how big is the space, how dark is the space, kind of like you can almost see how loud is the space, but you can't really, but you know what I'm talking about. And then capture your worship team from different angles. Capture them from the back of the house, capture them from within the congregation, like literally walk down, get in the congregation, and get photos of what it's like from a point of view of the person who's worshiping in your church. I tell our photographers all the time that those hands that you see in photos, they aren't obstacles, they aren't barriers, they are design elements. They communicate something, and that's that you are a part of a congregation and there are other people in there worshiping with you.
Yep.
And then after you get some of those in the congregation shots that establish that point of view, that's when you can go to the front and get some of your classic worship leader, hands wide open, really dramatic shots. You don't want every single photo from your worship set being of your worship leaders. Yep. You want them to be of the congregation. And we'll get to a little bit more of that here in the next step.
Yep.
But first, some pro tips here. Focus on moments of worship, not performance. We love to see like the worship leader really going at it on the guitar or screaming into the mic. Maybe not screaming into the mic, but maybe
they do. Yeah.
I don't know. But capture moments of worship and not performance. Capture moments where we are engaging with God in those moments, because those communicate something that just those performance moments don't. Also, make sure that you're exposing and balancing for your subject. Don't stress about the guitar player or the drum player way back in the background. We had one of our photographers in particular really struggling with this. He was trying to expose and white balance for the entire stage, or trying to correct every little thing in post. I did that when I started.
Yep.
But that's never, ever, ever going to happen. You're going to have weird light. You're going to have dark light. You're going to have dim light. You're going to have bright light. Focus and expose and white balance for the subject of your photo. And then finally, be mindful of the people worshiping around you. Get your shot, move to the next place. Don't be that guy or gal who just sits over somebody's shoulder and all day long through the entire service, because that's going to be a distraction. That's going to break their concentration during worship. Again, we mentioned Jeremy Poland's interview. We talk about this in detail in that interview. Go back a few episodes. Jeremy Poland. He'll tell you all about how to be inconspicuous during the worship set. All right, Connor, let's talk about taking photos of people in the congregation.
Absolutely. So we talked about getting shots of people on stage. Now it's time to turn that camera around and get people actually engaging in worship and during service. So some essential shots to keep in mind here. Hands raised from behind. This is a way to stay inconspicuous where you're able to get these great shots of people authentic and vulnerable in a worship setting. However, they're not put in an uncomfortable position. If you see someone worshiping has their hands up, do not get right up there in their face. And then when they open their eyes, they just see a camera start clicking away. Makes them feel uncomfortable and just overall just try to avoid it. Next, worshipers in the front row. This is great because, one, you have the light coming off the stage, so use it to your advantage because we all know if you're sitting in the back of the church, it's going to be pretty dark. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a lot harder for you to get those crisp, nice shots back there as it will be those first couple rows. Also, if you're shooting a little bit wider or medium shot, then you're able to kind of capture both what's going up on stage, the worshiping or the pastor preaching or whatever, as well as the reaction of the people in the first few rows. Get some shots of the congregation praying together. It shows them being intimate with each other and intentional. And it's a community of we are here to pray together for each other, not just, you're just not going to show up and just be by yourself. And then once again, like we said in almost all the other ones, keep your eye out for those interesting and out of the ordinary moments. Don't just be so stuck to your shot guide that you're going to miss those great moments that aren't going to happen every time. Keep your eye out. Keep your head on a swivel and be ready for those moments.
Yeah, I think one of the things that a new church photographers will often do is they will focus predominantly with what's going on stage, and they will miss so many things that are happening in the congregation. Turn your camera around. Every single service, turn your camera around and look at and observe what's going on within the congregation, because those are going to be the moving moments that are going to inspire people to engage with those photos.
Absolutely. So some pro tips to keep in mind for when taking photographs of the congregation. Capture the diversity of your congregation, the age, the race, the gender, etc. Show diversity. You're trying to showcase the community and the diversity of your congregation. So you do the same with photos. Once again, the first few rows of the congregation will often have the best light, and typically they'll be the most engaged worshipers as well. So utilize that to your advantage. And then worshiping is an intimate moment for many people. So once again, be mindful and respect your distance of people when worshiping. So once again, don't get right up in front of them.
Indeed. And speaking of being mindful and respectful, we're going to talk about now one of the most sensitive moments of the service during the sermon. This is where word of God is being proclaimed to the congregation. The reason that we're capturing these images is to show that teaching happens on the weekend. But it's also a very difficult time to take photos for a number of reasons. Number one, you don't have the rock concert going on off the stage to cover up your shutter clicks. Yep. Number two, this is, at least in our church, this is when the house lights come up. And this is when you are no longer invisible, right? Yep. So you are not only audible, you are visible, and the pastor is trying to preach. So here's how we manage that. Number one, your essential shots, capture the first 5 minutes of the sermon. Don't shoot through the whole sermon. You will be obnoxious. And we're going to talk about some behind-the-scenes stuff. This is a prime time for behind-the-scenes shot. So capture the first 5 minutes. Most pastors will start with like a story or an introduction to the sermon. They're not full on into the preaching of the word at this point. And so this is a good time to take those photos. Number one, like our pastor reads from his manuscript. So his nose is in his manuscript while he's preaching a lot. When he's telling a story, though, he's looking up and engaging with the congregation. Prime time. Just like worship shots, capture wide, capture medium, capture tight. But we're going to do it now from a few different angles. Start 90 degrees from the stage. So pastor's looking out, you're looking at him side on, and get that from the side preaching shot. You can often see some of the congregation watching on in that shot as well. And so 90 degree side of stage. Then work your way back around the wings toward the back and get that 45 degree quarter profile shot. So that you can see, again, you're shooting over the heads of people in the congregation, but you see the pastor preaching. Get wide, get medium, get tight, and then finally work your way around to the back and get the straight on from the back of the house, all within the first 5 minutes. The reason you do that, the reason you get that diversity of shots is if you're a church that uses those images to support your sermons when you publish them, the day after the sermon's preached. Then you'll have a variety of shots for your comm team to use. But then also, just in case you want to have promo for anything else in the future, you've got a good variety of preaching shots. We don't capture preaching shots every single weekend because we just don't have the reason to do that. But we do, if we have a special guest speaker or a guest pastor preaching for our congregation, we try to get a photographer out there. They'll probably come back, and so we'll want to promote that next time. But then also they're going to appreciate some photos of them preaching at your church as well. Some pro tips here. Again, shoot those first 5 minutes when your pastor's telling a story or working through an introduction, because that's when he's going to be looking up and most engaged and where you're going to be least distracting. But then get what you need and just sit yourself down. Don't be a distraction during the entire service, or go down to your volunteer headquarters or whatever and capture some photos there while the sermon's going on. And then this is just a general tip for photographing people who are speaking in general. Photograph on the gestures. So don't, hands down at your side, just looking straight out. You can't tell if he's just like a zombie staring out in the congregation or what. But if somebody is making his gesture with their hand, or if they have an expression on their face, that's when you get some interesting photos. And so capture on those gestures. Avoid shooting when they're looking down at notes and stuff like that. One more pro tip that we don't actually have in this guide is to watch out for facial expressions. Yep. I think it was probably Brady Shearer who says, if you pause your video and you don't look goofy, you're probably not expressive enough. Our pastor is definitely expressive enough. Looks great on video. Looks really weird sometimes on still. Then you can have some fun with those shots. We don't do that. We honor our pastors. Make sure that when you're capturing stills, that you get a good neutral and perspective and good neutral facial position that represents your pastor well, doesn't make him look goofy. My Z6 shoots 12 frames per second. If I capture a burst, I can probably get 1 or 2 frames out of there. Yep. That will get a good shot. So during the sermon, now let's talk about special events.
Yes. So moving on, special events. There's going to be those times in the service or outside of the Sunday service that you're going to want photos of. Some essential shots and moments of this. Baptisms. Baptisms is a great way to show what God is doing in your church, to showcase the intimacy of people coming to Christ and coming to their faith. Baptisms can be a little tricky, though, with the watercolors and just a lot of other moving parts that go in with it.
Yeah, so we're actually going to produce an entire guide on how to shoot baptisms because it's really tricky and because there's a lot of, you got fast motion, you got dim lights, you got a whole lot of other things, but it's also one of my favorite things to shoot. You get the water splash and you get moments of celebration, really intimate and emotional moments. So we're going to produce an entire guide for you on how to shoot baptisms. Look for that coming down the pipeline. Pun not intended, but it is now.
Absolutely. Next one, commissioning. This is a great way to really show what God is doing in your church, to show those next steps that people are taking. This can be everything from missionaries to church planners to, like at the summit, there's parent commissioning. This is a great way to, once again, capture what God is doing in the masses of people. Hey, we are buying into this. We are moving. We're uprooting to go overseas, to proclaim the gospel, to go into a city, to plant a church, etc. So once again, this is a great way, a great time to get some photographs. Another one, VBS and kids camps. We briefly touched on this back in the kids area, shot notes. However, it's going to be great to use for promotional for next year's VBS, as well as just to showcase what there is for the kids to do. How can the kids get involved? How are they going to be poured into, and how are they going to ultimately learn about Jesus through your church? Christmas and Easter. You're going to have a lot of people that are going to be at your Christmas and Easter service that you typically aren't going to see throughout the rest of the year. You're going to have special guests. You're going to have music. You're going to have a little bit of everything. You're going to have different lights, different sets, different everything. So this is going to be, once again, great to showcase during those times of year, also for upcoming years.
It's also the only time of year that our pastor actually wears a tie. So
big bonus
points.
Definitely. Kind of just touched on that with the special guest. If you have special guests coming, take photos of them, use them for when they come back to promote that. Also, like Rob mentioned, it's a nice gesture to give them some photos after they come and speak.
Yeah, and they're going to want to share that on their social media too, and say, hey, I'm honored to speak at your church and whatnot.
Yep. And then last, fellowships. So things that take place outside of Sunday morning or outside the four walls of your church. So if there's dinner, if there's conferences, small groups, anytime where your community and the people of your church are coming together in fellowship, it's going to be a great place to have some photographs to show that we are a church that meets just outside of the traditional Sunday morning. So some pro tips for special events. Create a comprehensive shot list for special events to make sure that you get everything captured. Some of these things are only going to happen one time. So like for a commissioning or something like that, they're only really going to get commissioned that one time. So make sure that you have the shots that you need to document that and to use to post.
Yeah, we kind of touched on this in our last episode too, when we were talking about when and how to hire a pro photographer. If somebody's coming in from the outside for a special event, they're absolutely going to need a comprehensive shot list. So that's just, everything here plus what are the different things that you're going to need to cover for this particular event.
Yep. And then second, give your photographers a schedule so that they know when things are happening and where. It does you no good if you give them a shot list of the shots they need. However, they have no idea where it's going to take place on your campus or in your building or at a park or whatever. Let them know so they can make sure that they're there, or at least one of the photographers is there to capture the shots.
Absolutely. All right. Final area that you can capture shots on the weekend. And this is a kind of you can't really give you the whole shot list here because this is a up in the air kind of spur of the moment thing as things happen, the behind the scenes shots. These are things that your congregation isn't always going to see. The virtue of these shots is that it's going to shed light on things that don't happen out in the open, that really help the folks that are looking at these photos think, man, this is something special. This is something that I don't, get to participate in, but I would love to be there. Things like your worship team backstage praying over the service, like, the experience that a congregant has as they walk in, worship team comes out, they sing, they go away, and that's it. But man, that worship team is rehearsing for hours. They're planning the service. They're praying over the service. So things like that backstage that happen before the service, amazing moments that the congregation doesn't always get a view on. You can help them see what it's like to go backstage and see what's going on in the moments before your worship team comes up on stage. Also, things like your prayer team. We have a prayer team that meets at every one of our campuses, every single service, and prays through the entire service. And so most of our congregation has no idea that happens, but you can let the congregation know that they're being prayed for, and also bring up some interest for that ministry by sharing images of things like that.
Yep.
Also, at our church, we have a volunteer headquarters. This is where volunteers kind of gather and hang out. Again, the average congregation member, they just walk in and they see there's the person at the door that I see every weekend. There's the person helping me get seated that I see every weekend. But there's more to being on a serving team than that. There's community and there's fellowship, and you can put that on display with those photos as well. And then also you can honor your volunteers by showing what happens before the service or after the service. So those volunteers who are arriving at the crack of dawn to set up in the parking lot or set up chairs or what have you, particularly if you're at a mobile campus and you don't have chairs just set up, you have to go from a middle school gymnasium to a church. That takes a ton of work. Put that on display. And also you can kind of like low key be like, y'all need to come help out this as well. And then breaking down as well, all that work that happens before and after. Those are just some of the behind-the-scenes shots. One thing to note, though, with behind-the-scenes shot is that often these happen in places where the average congregation member and your average volunteer team member can't or shouldn't go. And so I'm not going to have our entire photography team in the green room before the sermon happens to capture our pastor praying. But I, as the staff photographer, I can have that access to go do that. So this is where staff photographers, where you have access, that you can really shine and let people kind of in on that behind the scenes and feel like they're part of something that ordinarily they wouldn't get to take part in. All right. That was 43 different shot ideas. Yep. And if you're following along on video on our YouTube channel, we are still recording, you have seen 39 example photos. Yep. If you're listening on the podcast, we love you. churchphotographers.com/freebies. Get this PDF, download it. You can see everything that we just talked about and see all the images that we've referenced as well. But then also, like, you don't need to go and listen to this podcast every single time you want to shoot, because also included in that guide is a printable version with all 43 shots on a single piece of paper that you can print out, hand off to your photographers, and say, go, be fruitful, and photograph.
Yep.
Great resource for you, absolutely free, along with all of the other freebies we have in the freebie vault. churchphotographers.com/freebies. Go there, enter your email address, get all the goods.
So worth it.
All right. That's all we got time for. Man, if you enjoyed this podcast, one, go subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts, or
on YouTube.
On YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. Go there, get some, get our video podcast and a bunch of video resources.
Yep.
We're producing tutorials. We're producing reviews on gear and whatnot.
Yep.
So go there and subscribe as well. You'll get content that you don't get anywhere else by subscribing on our YouTube channel. And then leave us a review. We've gotten a few reviews already that, people are just like, man, this has helped me grow my photo team. This has helped me be more confident as a photographer. We love to hear those stories, and we love to share those stories. So please leave a review on any one of those areas: iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you consume this content. Let us know, because it helps keep us motivated too.
Absolutely.
All right, man.
It's been awesome.
This has been fun. This has been three-dimensional.
Learning experience.
If you have feedback for us, please send it our way too, because we are working on all of this, and we hope to improve it even more in the future. We love you guys. We'll see you next time. churchphotographers.com. Catch you next time.